Welcome to the Deep Dive. We explore compelling ideas, unpack the key insights from important sources, all for you. Today, we're getting into a really thought-provoking, maybe even unsettling perspective on global power. We're looking at an article from June 2025. It's by Tyreek A Gaynor-Fray, titled Military Strategies to Reshape Physical Reality and Their Importance in Establishing Global Order. So our mission here is to really unpack how Gaynor-Fray argues that, dominant nations aren't just fighting battles. He says they're literally manipulating physical reality, actually changing the world around people. Doing this to assert control, set up global hierarchies, and basically decide which countries, which people matter, and which, well, don't.
Yeah, it's quite a premise, isn't it? And Gaynor-Fray really sets the stage, arguing these aren't like just techniques for wartime. He presents them as strategic tools designed to fundamentally reshape how whole populations live, how they think, and how they're valued, on a global scale. The article details three main ways this happens, profoundly altering the landscape of international power, and, as he puts it, the actual lived experience for millions.
Okay, so Gaynor-Fray's central idea is that modern control isn't just about, say, having a bigger army. He argues it's about manipulating physical reality. Things like infrastructure disruption, actual bodily harm, and controlling perception. So how does he connect these methods to asserting dominance and creating those really deep differences between nations?
Well, that's where his argument gets quite stark, really. The article explains that this isn't just about showing military superiority. He calls it a deeper judgment about national worth. You see this sharp contrast he draws. Citizens of dominant countries are, in his words, protected, preserved, and empowered, whereas those in weaker nations are destabilized, devalued, and often dehumanized. It's about creating a fundamental difference in their day-to-day physical world.
Right. Okay. Let's dig into that first strategy Gaynor-Fray talks about, the deliberate disruption and destruction of physical infrastructure. He mentions specific things like transportation networks, water supplies, electricity grids, even healthcare systems being targeted. So what's the immediate effect when these vital things are just taken offline?
Well, the article points to, widespread confusion, obviously, and intense vulnerability for everyone affected. But what's really striking here is the psychological impact Gaynor-Fray emphasizes. It's quite powerful. He points out that our brains, well, they seem to be wired to see vertical structures like cityscapes, bridges, even old monuments as signs of stability, safety, a functioning society. So when these are deliberately destroyed, it's not just, breaking stuff. It's a deep psychological hit. It becomes a very direct message. You are not secure, your world isn't stable, you're not equal.
And the article really stresses that this destruction, it isn't just about getting rid of a building or a bridge. It's aimed at something much deeper. He uses the phrase annihilating both memory and aspiration, basically erasing a people's past by destroying the places where history happened, and then stripping away hope for the future by making the present just unbearable. It's about the erasure of identity, as he puts it. And he argues this goes even beyond wartime, using 21st century drone strikes as a pretty chilling example.
Yeah, and that idea, it extends beyond wartime, really ties into what Gaynor-Fray says about drone strikes. When they happen without troops on the ground, no direct fight, they act as what he calls precision messages. Messages from dominant nations to those they see as, well, less valued. They serve two purposes, right? Taking out a perceived threat, sure, but also acting as this constant reminder. A reminder that certain nations can act completely unchallenged inside another country's airspace, on their soil.
That's a significant point Gaynor-Fray makes there about bombing having this dual function. It's the tactical goal, eliminating capacity, and the symbolic one, degrading a nation's status, which then creates inequality.
Exactly. And he gives us some very physical examples. He calls them physical testimonies and maps of international value. He points to the rebuilt skyline of Berlin, contrasting it with the cratered fields of Gaza and the abandoned cities in Syria. These become tangible proof in his view. When he calls them maps of international value, what he means is these aren't just scars of conflict. They are, in his framework, literal maps showing who holds value internationally and who doesn't. It's a sobering idea, isn't it, that a landscape, a skyline, can communicate a nation's standing so clearly.
Yeah, it is. And look, it's important we note here that the author, Tyreek A Gaynor-Fray, does state he does not entirely disagree with the regular U.S. air attacks on foreign countries. Our role in this deep dive is just to convey the author's viewpoint accurately. We're not endorsing it ourselves. Okay, so we've talked about physical structures as tools of control, but then Gaynor-Fray moves to something even more direct, the second strategy, which is actual harm to the human body itself.
Yes, the article gets into methods like chemical weapons, forced displacement, or even long-term deprivation, lack of food, medicine, basic necessities. These aren't just random acts in his view. They're strategies designed to physically impact people on a massive scale. I mean, think about the lasting effects. If a whole population is forced from their homes, you lose your community, your way of making a living, the trauma just goes on. Or, the slow grind of deprivation on an entire generation's health and potential.
So what's the ultimate result the article points to here?
Well, individuals become alienated from their own physical world. They sort of lose their connection to the places they live. And this, he argues, can actually make entire populations passive or dependent. It essentially creates these really stark differences in the physical reality for people in one nation compared to another. It's about disrupting their ability to just live and thrive on their own terms.
Okay, that brings us to the third strategy he outlines, manipulating emotions and psychology. Perception control. How does Gaynor-Fray argue this kind of completes the picture, this distortion of reality for a target population?
Right. He explains how things like propaganda, sustained fear campaigns, strategic misinformation, they're used systematically, used to shape what people believe, what they fear, even what they remember. It's about sort of overwhelming the target population with a narrative that makes them doubt their own experiences, their own observations, like maybe constantly broadcasting messages that undermine trust in their own leaders or their neighbors, or maybe exaggerating threats to make people scared and compliant.
Now, this next bit from Gaynor-Fray, it really makes you think differently about information itself. He states that perception itself becomes weaponized. And according to the article, this is most often used against nations and peoples viewed as lesser in the global hierarchy.
Yeah, and if you put these three strategies together, the infrastructure destruction, the bodily harm, the perception control, Gaynor-Fray argues they don't just achieve, say, military goals or political ones. They fundamentally redraw the boundaries of reality for entire populations. Just imagine your world, your sense of safety, your community, your basic understanding of what's true. Imagine all that being systematically taken apart and then rebuilt by some outside power.
And he discusses the ultimate outcome, as the author sees it. These strategies create differences not just in power, but in how people live, think, and are valued. It really paints a picture of a kind of two-tiered global system.
It does. And the article's concluding thought is quite powerful. It says that nationality itself becomes the dividing line between those who control the world and those who must survive in the version of it handed to them. It highlights this really profound sense of almost like destiny being imposed on people based purely on where they're born.
He even adds an update at the end of the article. In it, he suggests his suggestions were acknowledged, and he reiterates his view that reshaping the physical reality of our enemies is indeed an effective strategy, which really underlines his perspective on how these strategies are seen or how he sees them as being applied in the real world and being effective. Okay, so to sort of wrap up our deep dive here, Tyreek A Gaynor-Fray's article lays out this pretty stark framework where physical destruction, bodily harm, and mind control aren't just, side effects of conflict. They are deliberate tools used to assert dominance and create this tiered global order he describes.
Yeah, and I think the really profound takeaway, the thing that kind of shifts your perspective, is how Gaynor-Fray argues that these ruined landscapes, these controlled perceptions, they aren't just the aftermath. They are, in his words, actively constructed maps of international value. Meaning the very act of destruction or manipulation becomes this deliberate statement about who matters on the world stage and who doesn't.
So, a final thought for you, listening. What does this all mean as you watch events unfold around the world? How might understanding these strategies, this perspective, change how you interpret the news headlines or maybe the physical changes you see happening globally? Something to think about.